And welcome back to round 6 of the Game Grid Spring Championship. We have Zach again. He's been doing well, so sticking at table number 1 against Brian Myers. Brian is playing Azorius Aggro, matched up against Zach's Teamer Nexus that we saw last round, and we'll be underway shortly.
Yeah, I imagine this is probably the worst matchup for Zach in terms of decks he wants to play against. Brian's going to have a lot of pressure, and then he's going to have some permission in his sideboard. So being able to have a lot of pressure and then being able to counter like a key spell from Zach can really set him kind of on his heels. So
yeah, so it's real strong. Especially against in a format where Standard usually tries to be a little slower than the other formats and go a little bigger. Trying to be as efficient as possible can be a pretty good game.
Yeah, and I don't know what Brian's record is in the tournament, but we know Zach is 5-0. So Zach, I think, just needs one more win in order to get into the top 8.
Yeah, so Zach might have a win and in. I'll go check on Brian's record. Alright, so Brian is also 5-0, so this is probably a win and in for both of them. Found out a neat little tidbit where Zach's game win percentage is 100% on the day.
Has not lost a game yet.
Yeah.
See if Brian can break that streak. He leads off with the Plains into a turn 1 Sky Marcher Aspirant.
That's some nice glare, the late sun coming down. Zach plays the Steam Vents and then gets attacked on turn 2 from Brian, who plays a Glacial Fortress and a Healer's Lock.
Into a Bodyguard. Yeah, this is a really good opener for Brian. He's already got 5 points of power in play, and it's turn 2. Zach's probably just going to have a Growth Spiral here.
Zach's going to have to combo off pretty quickly, it looks like.
Yeah, and he lost the die roll, so being on the draw is going to make this a pretty difficult match for him, I think. And Brian even has like a Conflict Tribunal for like any possible Wilderness Reclamations.
So there's an attack from Brian for 5. That lifelink on the Healer's Hawk will also put Brian up to 21. And then he plays an Adonto Vanguard to follow it up.
Yeah, so he's already representing basically killing Zach in the next 2 turns here.
And even if Zach has the turn 3 Reclamation, it's not like he can do anything to win, right?
Yeah, he's basically going to need like some number of fogs in order to just make sure he doesn't die.
So we'll see what he has to show us. There's his 4th land. Does he have the Reclamation? Looks like he might.
He's got a Hydro Crisis, yeah. So he's basically just saying wants that as a blocker here. Actually just trying to get on the board.
He does draw a card off of that, and does get a blocker. Brian Myers just draws a land, and there's that Conclave Tribunal.
Yeah, so using it basically to just continue to keep up the pressure here. Getting in for 8 points of damage. Unfortunately, the life gain doesn't actually change the math very much. As Brian still has him dead next turn. So Zach's pretty much going to have a fog at this point for the rest of the game. And that's going to be really hard for him to have that, especially since he doesn't have like any sort of card advantage engine set up at this point.
So here's a Lethal Swing. What does Zach have to say about it?
No, he does have a Blink of an Eye, so that will also still buy him a turn, basically.
Another Adonto Vanguard, joining the one that was bounced and then replayed. So Zach really needs a combination of cards to get him out of here. He is almost up to 7 mana though.
Yeah, so if he could get like a, I think the biggest problem is he doesn't have Reclamation yet. If he had like a Reclamation, he would have been able to play a Reclamation and start like generating some advantage. As it is though, he's basically at this point just priced into having to have like a fog from this point on in the game, unless he's going to be able to start looping multiple turns.
So that was a Root Snare in the combat step, so Zach buys himself another turn. And then he follows up with Chemister's Insight, trying to find whatever it is he needs to survive. Fortunately for him, it doesn't look like Brian can really kill him outside of the combat step, so those Root Snares look pretty good.
Yeah, that is the one thing about White Weenie. It looks like Zach scooping it up was unable to find another Root Snare. One thing about the White Weenie decks is they have to kill you with combat damage. There's no other way for them to kill you. But they trade that off for basically having a much more consistently aggressive curve than, say, like Mono Red.
Yeah, we see that there, where he had 3 creatures in play at the end of turn 2 and was able to just attack with consistent sources of damage. Unlike in Burn decks, we were watching Modern Burn, but it plays out similarly in Standard Burn, where you play your Burn spell, it does some damage, and then it's gone, whereas the creatures provide that constant damage output.
Yeah, and in Standard, like I said, the real trade-off is just you have a much more consistent early curve with a lot more power in play earlier. As we saw in that game, like Brian was able to have, on turn 2 he has 5 points of power in play, and you realistically won't ever get that with like the Mono Red decks.
So convincing showing from Brian, and being on the play game 1 means if they go to game 3, he'll be on the play 2, which is an advantage when you're trying to be an aggro deck. But what are the sideboard options for these 2 decks?
I think Brian has some number of negates, which is probably the only card he really wants to bring in. I don't think he wants to put too many reactive cards in. Really, his deck is already set up, I think, to be pretty strong against Zach. My guess is Zach has some number of fiery cannonades in his sideboard, which he's going to bring in for sure, just as an early sweeper to try and like reset basically the board. The one good thing about White Weenie in this current Standard format is that a lot of the threats are, the deck actually has a lot of resilience to a card like Fiery Cannonade. Cards like Tithe Taker and Adonto Vanguard generally leave a threat behind even after a sweeper. Depending on his list, but I think some of the White Weenie lists do play will play like 400 Witnesses as well. So a lot of times, like even with like Cannonade, you're still going to be facing like some number of creatures after the Cannonade resolves.
Cannonade also not very strong against Loxodon or Benalish Marshall that increase the toughness of the creatures.
Yeah, like a Loxodon or a Marshall doesn't get a 1 toughness creature out of range, but it does get things like the History of Benalia tokens out of range of that. Or if you even end up with like a Marshall plus a Loxodon Convoke, then they have 3 toughness and they're able to get out. I don't know if Zach has any spot removal in his sideboard, if he has like shocks or anything like that. It's possible he does, but again, don't know what is in his sideboard, so don't really know. But I'm sure anything he has that's like red removal base, he's going to be siding in.
He probably did come prepared with some kind of plan for this matchup, though, as Azorius Aggro is a potent and known force in Standard.
Yeah, I mean, Zach's definitely gonna have some sort of plan. Not only is there White Weenie, there's the Mono Red decks, which are pretty popular, and Mono Blue. Mono Blue, in terms of its texture, is different than the other 2 aggressive decks, but it is still fundamentally a beatdown deck with cheap early curve, and then trying to finish the game off. Maybe not quite as quick as the other decks, but finish the game off with like a bunch of cheap creatures and then using permission to get the last couple turns.
Brian just hoping that he can recreate in one of the next 2 games a similar situation as that first one.
Yeah, and Zach losing that dice roll I think was really bad for him. because even if he still lost that, being able basically to have to be on the draw in 2 games out of this is going to be really rough. I mean, this is the kind of matchup where being on the play or being on the draw, I think, is really, really important. There's some matchups where I don't think being on the play or being on the draw in standard matters as much, but this one in particular, I think you're really going to feel that on either side of the table.
Yeah, we can see that from that Sky Marcher Aspen just dealing extra damage on turn 1 for Brian before Zach was really able to even tap with any mana.
Yeah, or even just the fact that Zach's development is just like a turn behind the whole time, right? Like his deck in particular really wants to hit its land drops. It really wants to get like a Reclamation in play as quick as possible. And when you're a turn behind, you're always doing that one turn like slower than you would really want to. All right, so it looks like Zach's going to be keeping his hand.
And it looks like a quick keep from Brian too.
Yeah, we do see that sideboard negate. Brian's got another turn 1 Sky Marcher Aspirant. It looks like he's got an Adontra Vanguard. That's exactly the hand I would want versus Zach. I've got some early pressure. I've got a resilient threat against Fiery Cannonade, and I've got negates to basically really put the pressure on Zach. So
Zach's been developing kind of slowly, just playing out lands tapped, maybe preserving his life total a little bit, but not being able to do much with his mana as Brian just keeps on attacking.
Yeah, and I think Brian did show. I think he had a Loxodon, which that might have been a turn where he wanted a Loxodon, as he would have been able to do it that turn. But instead, he's just going to continue to keep the pressure on. Plays a Legion's Landing.
Legion's Landing, a strong way to keep coming and attacking these more controlling decks, even if they manage to stabilize. Usually you can flip Legion's Landing into Adontra the first floor and just churn out tokens turn after turn. There's 4 mana from Zach and nothing really to show for it. Hopefully he has something to spend his mana on.
Yeah, and Brian's like I said, pretty happy. Even though he's not doing quite as much damage as he did last turn, I think he's pretty much just keeping negate mana up for this game. Playing the role of the aggro control deck.
This looks like a pretty strong play. How does Zach even play around this negate?
I mean, realistically, he probably can't in some ways. He's probably going to just have to just start jamming spells into it to really like try and push some sort of advantage in the game. I think he does have a candidate in his hand, so he can pass and just use the cannonade inside Brian's attack step. The question is whether Brian's going to use the negate to protect his two creatures, the Sky Marcher Aspirant and the Vampire token.
See, Zach's thinking really hard. Brian's put him under quite a lot of pressure, and it looks like he will be waiting on that cannonade.
Yeah. And now I think the question is whether Brian wants to negate the cannonade. I think he might actually want to, mostly because it means that his Legion's Landing would flip. And he'd be able to flip Legion's Landing and then follow it with like a History of Monopoly, which again is going to put a ton of pressure on Zach.
See, he's thinking now how he wants to do it, what maybe Zach could have. Maybe Zach's thinking about whether to let Brian declare his attackers or not.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to let Brian flip that Legion's Landing. It would give Brian a nice little boost in mana this turn, which would potentially allow him to play an extra spell or two. And on top of that, it represents like a steady stream of threat that Zach would end up having to deal with. Looks like Brian's actually going to let this resolve. I think he's pretty much just dead set on using that negate to counter like a Wilderness Reclamation.
I like that idea a lot. This kind of goes back to what you were saying back when Zach was playing against Nicholas and how we wanted Nicholas to save his permission for the big payoff spells like Wilderness Reclamation or Nexus Evade.
Yeah, I think the choice for using negate becomes a lot more interesting in this particular matchup because the match is so time sensitive that you can sometimes use negate aggressively. Like he could have used it there to protect his creatures if he wanted to, and like I said, flip the Legion's landing, which represents a pretty big swing in tempo. But again, instead he's just looking to just keep Reclamation off the board. He still has 6 points of power with the follow-up Vanguard. Yeah, and I think Zach just has to start playing spells.
Playing around negate with his Hydro Krasis.
Yeah, the big problem for Zach is that the Krasis is basically just a speed bump versus those Vanguards.
Because paying 4 life to give them indestructible is minimal cost to Brian. Zach doesn't really have a way to pressure Brian's life.
Yep, and then this will drop Zach to 5.
So Zach just, like you said, using his Krasis as a speed bump, but he's dead on board. Plays some more of the Folly.
Crawler Print is an interesting one. Probably has it in the sideboard kind of as a flex answer for cards like Nib Mizzet, and then also gets supported in here where it maybe can hopefully pick off a Healer's Hawk and then act as a blocker later. Here again, it's mostly just a speed bump because those Vanguards are continuing just to run over Zach's life total.
I mean, if Zach can provide speed bump for, 5 turns in a row, suddenly paying 4 life does start to matter, though.
It does. The problem is Zach is continuing to take damage with each of these attacks. In fact, he's at 2 life now. And Brian's just really just defending his position here with both Negate and Disdainful Stroke.
That Negate now effective against Root Snare as well, able to push through that last bit of damage if that's Zach's answer. So we'll see what he's able to do. He does have a Wilderness Reclamation in hand. It looks like he's going to try to play it.
Yeah, and he's just going to answer with a Disdainful Stroke, and now he just has a Negate if Zach even does have a Root Snare for the follow-up attack.
Yep, and that does it. Brian with a quick 2 games over Zach. The first 2 games that Zach has lost today.
Yeah, I mean, the game's pretty much played out exactly how I think you would expect this matchup to play out. Zach didn't see any Wilderness Reclamations, and that he really, I think, needs a turn 4 Reclamation or a turn 3 Reclamation with a Growth Spiral in order, I think, to have any sort of fighting chance in that game to start generating a mana advantage and start like looping through his deck. Without a Wilderness Reclamation, he's just kind of getting beat up the entire game and just playing like a really bad control deck, right? Like he's much worse than Esper is in terms of your actual answers to the cards that Brian is representing.
So Brian will move on 6-0. He might be able to draw his next 2 rounds to get into the top 8. So we'll see if we see him playing any more standard. Zach, with his first loss in the day, is 5-1, and he still has a good chance of getting into top 8, but doesn't get to sit them out just yet. So with that, we'll come back with the next round and show you more standard.
Yep, we'll see you guys for the next one.